Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Ranting Revolutionary. Today I'm going to share quite an interesting experience with an encounter of an MI5 agent who actually rented a room in my mother's house and actually studied at the Church of Scientology. And she was a lovely lady, and this is a very nice little episode in my youth. I had to write notes because we're going back 60, no, 40 something years, more than 40 years, nearly 50 years. So I did take time to write a lot of notes, and I will be referring to those. And I do have to give you a bit of background. So the background is that I was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, of English parents who sent me to a French school where the teachers came from Tours in France, so you have accentless French. And the standard was very high, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I came to Britain, and we had to go to English state schools, and I can honestly not recommend West Oakley Primary School, but I will give Imberhorn Comprehensive School a recommendation, and in both cases, the school meals were actually quite okay. So, the reason my family came back from Canada, my parents having originally left Britain to go and settle in Canada, was because my father was a very successful institutional stockbroker, and Trudeau, the uncle of the current disaster Trudeau, the one that's probably Fidel's son, uh, instigated a law in 1970 or 71, citing my father and two or three other stockbrokers for a special tax because they made so much money. So this was completely unconstitutional. The two or three other guys caved in. My father, he fought it, and he also voted with his feet and went back to England briefly, and then went back to Canada again. In the meantime, we'd been living with my aunt during the summer holidays in London, taking lovely picnics in Richmond Park, and thoroughly enjoying the sights of London, the Transport Museum, the Natural History Museum, all the stuff little boys like. And our grandfather, maternal grandfather, used to trundle us about, and he was very sweet and kind. So we moved to East Grinstead in West Sussex, outside East Grinstead in West Sussex, in a little village called Sharpthorne, into a very large country house. And our next door neighbour was Jane Kember, who was the guardian of the Church of Scientology. Now, we'd never heard of Scientology, but she became a very good friend and gently converted my mother to Scientology. And I used to play Risk very often with Jane Kember at the weekends, um, either Saturdays or Sundays, and sometimes even both. And later on in life, I became very good friends with her eldest son, Peter, who came to my second marriage when I got married in Bulgaria. So, uh, my mother was very interested in doing some Scientology, but it was very expensive. And as my father's employment situation was somewhat precarious, this was not the time to go and spend loads of money. So she did a deal with Jane, which was a very good deal, whereby she could work for the Church of Scientology, get her training into counseling, and she would also have a small wage, a real pittance. But the good thing was, because she lived next door to Jane, she could be Jane's housekeeper, look after her children and her own children. So this was killing several birds with one stone, and it was in everybody's interests, and it worked out very well indeed, and to such an extent that Peter said at my wedding that my mother was more of a mother than his was, simply because my mother was present and poor old Peter's mother was not. And that's not in any way a judgment value, that's just how it was perceived. So, to compensate for the fact that the wage is very low, my mother took in paying guests vetted by the Church of Scientology. So once again, everybody's interest is served. And so we had, I think Daphne was actually one of our first paying guests, and she was a typical English upper middle class lady, short, petite, 40 plus, nicely dressed, soft spoken, kind, spoke with the right accent, very discreet. I think we children used to meet her at breakfast, and that was it. In the evening, she used to go out to eat, or if she wasn't going out to eat, she was meeting someone to give her reports, or she was writing the reports and sending them off. I don't know. But she used to come back at a reasonable hour in a perfectly normal, sober state. She was very discreet, very neat and clean, lovely lady. And we didn't have any problem with Daphne whatsoever. We children, as you know, quite perceptive, but Daphne was a very nice person. So, once again, in the context, we're looking at 1976 or 1977, and there was a lot of bad PR about the Church of Scientology at the time. And this is quite interesting because in 1971, Sir Keith Joseph held a full public inquiry into the church, as well as actually taking the time and making the effort to actually look at the teachings, the technology, and actually, what was in the scriptures, in inverted commas, right? And he came out with the fact that this is not harmful in any way whatsoever, which is very nice, actually, and fair, because he did have experts on both sides of the fence, and he came to the conclusion, sorry, you cannot say it's harmful. So, they did have a problem with public relations, and one of the reasons was that it was CIA sponsored. If you know anything about the CIA and how it controls the media, you will understand this. If you don't, you can definitely check this out on programs called the Y-Files, Judging Freedom, and Redacted, and you will very quickly realize that we are living in a holographic construct. Also, this the CFS's Church of Scientology does have to take some responsibility for the very, very poor PR management that was taking place. And one of the reasons was the person in charge of PR, who managed to completely ruin an interview with Joan Bakewell. Joan Bakewell is an excellent journalist, or was, and an excellent broadcaster. She even was in receipt of a peerage, and she spoke in the House of Lords a few years ago, praising the system that she went through, starting in a state primary school, state secondary school, then on to university. And she did make an excellent career, not only with the BBC but with other broadcasting networks. And she did do a documentary on the Church of Scientology called Thank You, Ron. I was too young to be interviewed. However, she tried to interview David Gaiman, the Deputy Guardian for Public Relations worldwide, and he screwed it up completely. Now, had I been Jane in her place, I would definitely have fired him after that, because Joan was very favourably disposed and was genuinely curious about the Church of Scientology. Okay. So, in the background, the Soviet Union has not invaded Afghanistan at this time. Jimmy Carter, I think, was president at the time, if I'm not mistaken, and the context is one of inflation, obviously, but things are generally ameliorating in the Western world for most people. Now, the only thing I have against Sir Keith Joseph was the fact that he's pro-eugenics. And we hadn't started talking about depopulation at that stage, but eugenics is always somewhat frightening. So, Daphne was a full-time student, which means that she studied roughly from 9 till 5 or 9 till 6. And You could describe her as a perfect PG. She was neat and tidy. She didn't leave a mess in the bathroom, didn't leave a mess in the kitchen. She was always polite and kind with us children. And honestly, not a problem. Not a problem. Nice lady. So, we didn't see her in the evenings because she went out to eat, either to write her reports or give them orally to her handler. And this is with, obviously, a lot of retrospection. We'd see her at breakfast. She was always pleasant, kind, and never left a mess. So, I was on school holidays at the time, and I was doing a course in the same room as Daphne, uh, and my course was a course on how to study, and I was 13 or 14 at the time. And I honestly consider that this course has stood me in good stead all my life. Excellent course, and I would recommend it to anybody, no matter where you are on the learning curve. It will always help you. So, the course supervisor asks everybody for a moment of attention, and he congratulates Daphne on finishing her basic communication course, or Habit Apprentice Scientologist course as it was called at the time, and everyone claps, and the course supervisor says, "Would you like to say a few words?" Whereupon Daphne bursts into tears, but very, very, sanglots, as the French say, rivers of tears. And she finally catches her breath and says, "Right, I have nothing for praise for the people I've met, the staff and the students. I really enjoyed the course. Yes, it is a useful course. There's nothing harmful in it whatsoever. I don't understand what all the fuss is about. And she said, look, I cannot leave you without confessing that I was working for Mi5, and I was tasked with sending in reports about all the bad things that go on here. And as she said, there was nothing bad going on, and on the contrary, she thoroughly enjoyed it and had the greatest admiration and respect for her fellow students and the staff." And this is an Mi5 agent. So I would like, very posthumously, with 40 plus years of lateness, acknowledge her enormous courage, acknowledge her integrity, and leave that with you so that you may cogitate. Nothing will stop you from discovering what you wish to discover on your spiritual journey. All you have to do is look. So I hope this is useful to many people, and I hope that you enjoyed this little anecdote, because it's an anecdote with a big, big allegorical, moral, ethical, philosophical message attached to it. And I thoroughly enjoyed recording this for you. And I also thoroughly enjoyed paying tribute to Daphne. In passing, I'd also like to pay tribute to Jane Kember, who made enormous sacrifices for the Church of Scientology, which I'm not going to go into in this podcast. And I would also like to say that my next podcast will be my brush with an Mi6 agent, which is not as nice as this particular brush with an Mi5 agent. Such is life. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.